Hello, good people. I am super, super excited to bring you this interview with Rich Alapack of We All Live Here. He
Hi, Ella.
Hi. He is an artist, a disruptor, I would say, like just on a mission to really help solve the problems that we have in our world through art. Rich Alapack has his program, We All Live Here, which the mission is to use art, community, and technology as a method to remind us all to get along and help each other succeed. And that's totally in line with what I love doing and what I love thinking about. So if you know me, you know that I am obsessed with Rich's work. I've probably told all of my friends, I'm like, have you seen We All Live Here? Have you seen that? Have you seen that? That's Rich. And so I'm just so glad to be in conversation with you today, talking about this. So welcome, Rich.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I think this might be the most fun I'll ever have on a podcast, just to sit and chat with you. So
I hope so. Yeah, I think we'll have a great conversation. We always do. So yeah, I'm really grateful that you're sharing space with me today. And so I guess I'm gonna start a little bit differently, and just that, like, I just want to get a feel for like how you're feeling today. Like, where's your head at? Like, what are you thinking about? What's been on your mind lately? Because there's just a lot going on, and I think it's more than how are you, but like, how are you feeling? What's been on your mind? So I wonder if we can start with that.
yeah, I mean, it feels like the message is more necessary than ever with what's going on in Ukraine, and I'm fearful, quite honestly, because I feel like it's really sad that the Olympics end,
Yes,
and the next thing that happens on the global stage, the Olympics are supposed to bring everybody together, right? And Russia's always a huge part of that, and all of a sudden, a week later or whatever, maybe not even, we're watching potentially history repeat itself and World War III happen, and it's kind of terrifying to me that we're still living in this type of place that things like this can happen, and we've got to evolve. We don't need just a revolution, we need an evolution. And that has to happen. And then on top of it, this pandemic is still going on. Like, no matter what everybody wants to have happen, that's still a reality. And it's almost like I actually probably haven't even heard anything about COVID because of what's been going on with the invasion. So
no, I think that's why I wanted to start with it, because one, it ties into the mission of the work that you're doing, but two, I think one of the things I've struggled with over the past week or so has been like that question of like, are we supposed to just keep going? Like, are we supposed to just keep going as if nothing is happening, as if that's not happening over in Ukraine, as if, the Olympics didn't just end, there's all these crises going on around the world, and we're just sort of being told to like, okay, well, keep coming to the office and like keep doing your job and like just keep going, and like we're just not pausing to reflect on it. It's something that I've thought about for a while, because there's just this collective grief that we're building up, right? Like everyone is feeling it. And so I wanted to give space for that, but also acknowledge that that's sort of tied to the work that you do, which is we all live here, we all inhabit this planet, right? And so I wonder if you could share a little bit more about the background of how you got to We All Live Here. I know the story, and I really encourage everyone. I will put a link in the description box, but please go watch the TED Talk as well, because that gives you history of the project as well. But I wonder if you could give us like a brief introduction to We All Live Here.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really a romantic Genesis story. I mean, I was walking my dog, and in my old neighborhood, I used to live in Bucktown in Chicago. There was a white wall garage that always looked like it was going to fall down before the next dog walk. And having a background in advertising and technology, I mean, advertising kind of pollutes your brain, so you kind of think in advertising ways. And so I would go on this repetitive cycle of walking the dog. Same place, same route. And I would see this garage, and eventually I started to think, like, what could I write on that wall that the owner would want to have on that wall, that would be proud to have on that wall, that would be a message that would mean something to that person. And I thought of God knows how many terrible ideas. But one night, right immediately, the blocks before that place, I had been thinking about, reflecting about how I had come to the United States from Canada.
Right.
And so I had been thinking about, my journey and how when I first arrived in Prior Lake, Minnesota, that's where my aunt and my uncle live, and they were gracious enough to host me.
Mhm.
One of the first people I ever met, because I was a senior in high school, her dad was the chief of the natives there that run a tribal casino.
Yep.
And that fosters a lot of jealousy because they get, the rumors of whatever they get because they're part of that tribe, and the dollar amounts that they receive just for being born really makes people angry. And it really bothered me because I was like, I don't care how much the casino makes or anybody gets from money from a casino. All the land that everybody else's house on is stolen, and nothing will ever repay that. And so I would try to correct people, and you quickly realize when you correct people that you're falling upon deaf ears. And so I think that was all in my head at the time. And We All Live Here popped into my brain when I saw the wall, and I went, wow, income equality, gender equality, racial equality, sexual equality, the environment. These are all hyper important or maybe hard to talk about topics that fit under the umbrella of these four really dead simple words. And, everybody knows that the simpler the message, the more people it can reach. And so I felt like this was a really simple message, but also very complex, also very deep. And it can mean whatever you think it means when you see it. It's not like really necessarily out there, but I really think it's about trying to help people just remember that simple fact that we do all live here. And so there needs to be space for, no matter what your beliefs are, because each one of us, whether we believe it or not, is important to contribute to this body of intellectualism, human spirit, whatever you want to call it, that we are all a part of. And without you or without me or without any of the other people, we miss perspectives. We miss, different viewpoints that add to this collective potential. And I think it's really important that we start to figure out a way to do that evolution that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. And I think, so I think I started seeing We All Live Here actually before I met you, because I probably saw it on like some of the schools. So it's on Ogden Elementary at State and Oak, I want to say.
Yep.
And that was one of the first ones, right?
Yeah, that was one of the first ones. And the first time we had put, I forget how many translations were on that, but that's a very,
there's like at least 3 or 4. There's like Japanese, Spanish.
Oh, I think there's
there's like
16 or 17. It's the whole wall. Yeah. So, but that was an amazing activity because, if you think about it, kids aren't allowed to write on the wall. Kids aren't, they're not supposed to like, I think the Mr. Clean dry eraser was invented because kids could write on the wall, right? And so for that day, that school encouraged the kids to come out and color in those phrases, those translations of the phrase. But that didn't last long when you've got 800 kids. So it spilled off into the streets, the sidewalk, other parts of the building. And it became just like a bomb of positivity that went off in the Gold Coast, which, maybe doesn't have stuff like that happen very often. So.
Exactly. Yeah. They definitely keep things pretty contained, but it was such a relief to see it there. And I think after that, I must have met you. I think I met you through my mother originally. And I was just so grateful that she introduced us, because I was just like, this is what I'm all about. And I think I'll acknowledge that I do have the privilege of having lived in another country, having been in 2 other countries and visited and like really understood on like an intrinsic level what We All Live Here sort of means. But I want to encourage more folks to go out and like meet new people, even within America. You don't even have to go that far, right? We do all live here, and so we all are like have more in common with each other than we don't. And I think that's always been something that I've been passionate about. But I do acknowledge that there's like ways in which people are not treated the same, even if we all live here, right? Even if we all inhabit the same space and things like that. And so I wonder why, like maybe if you can talk a little bit about, it's such a simple phrase, right? But I think it might be hard for some to understand. And I wonder if you've had any experiences with folks who've been like, what do you mean we all live here? Like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, what have they, like, what have been the people who've been like, oh, I don't really buy into that. What has been sort of the reaction?
Well, so there's a couple stories that like kind of leap into my mind, and one of them is I'm in my studio right now, and I got into this space because I tagged um, the wall outside underneath the Ohio Street Bridge, and like 3 days later, a girlfriend of mine that lives just a few doors down from this building, she was like, it's already gone. And I was like, what do you mean it's already gone? Like where I put it, it should have been there forever.
Yeah.
And I think what happened was while I was doing that, I had the only real negative encounter that I've ever had. And so I'm writing the message on the wall, and I see that out of the corner of my eye, this guy kind of watching me. And finally he just says, what does this mean? And so I explained to him kind of what we've already talked about. And the guy just went off, and he started to berate me in the street and told me that poor people are poor because of the decisions they make, and just went off the handle. And this is one of the more wealthier corners of the city. So hearing that is even more particularly disgusting in this environment. And so then the police came a few minutes later. So I just hypothesized that guy probably called the police on me as well. Lucky for me, the police understand after I explained to them. They gave me the opportunity to speak and explain to them what I do, and they kind of left me alone. But I think that kind of attitude is so it's really prevalent, and it's really terrible that we have this level of selfishness. Even if you have this weird idea that poor people are poor just because of the poor decisions that they make, the idea that you wouldn't help people make better decisions if that was your belief, or or that you would stop your thinking with that weird thought and not try to actually identify what's going on. I mean, these anecdotal things do not mean anything. You need to have conversations with people to learn about what's going on in their life. There's a lot of different reasons why people have whatever economic circumstance they have, right? So that's one of the stories where I feel like I had to kind of bite my tongue a little bit and
sort of defend, but like
not return the fury with the fury, right?
And
the second one was, I remember one of the schools I went to, I think it was probably in the second or maybe the third year of doing the school projects. The whole entire school, Chicago's a very blue or left kind of town anyway. And this particular school community was very worried because there was one family that I guess was really hyper conservative, and they knew that the mom was going to come pick their kids up from school and she was definitely going to find me. And so they sort of, preemptively told me that this was going to happen the entire day. And I wasn't worried about that. Like the whole point of We All Live Here is that if you're a conservative or you're a liberal, you're necessary. And the binary aspects of our society are what's dangerous. We are not binary people. We are multi-layered people, species that can have conservative ideas on certain things and progressive ideas on other things. And so I think, when she finally did come up to me after school, like everyone said she would, she just wanted to know, what is that and why is this happening? And I explained, I didn't come and pollute your child's brains.
Right.
I think you feel marginalized in this community because you're a minority in this community. And I think that that's not appropriate. The space should be given for your beliefs just as much as the space should be given for someone who believes the opposite of your beliefs. And I think she understood that when I explained it that way, and appreciated that there was someone who is saying something like that or acting that way towards her. Because if you feel like you're being marginalized, you're not participating fully in whatever the community is. And that community is not getting whatever your strengths are, probably.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know if I
Yeah.
really answered your question, but those are the
No,
two.
yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where folks will challenge it because it's so simple, right? You
Oh,
don't have to
academically,
yeah.
I've definitely had that happen. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like academics sometimes think that things need to be like Einsteinian level in order to be important.
Yeah.
And like I said before, you know, nothing complex ever changed the world.
Yeah.
It's the most simple ideas that change the world. You know, love, peace, those kinds of ideas are actually more simple ideas.
Yeah.
Than they're very complex things as well, but they're very simple in their original thought.
Yeah.
So,
and I think
that,
one of the things I've always appreciated about We All Live Here and about the work that you do is the accessibility aspect of it, because I've started to get into the art. I've been into the art world. I collect art. I love going to galleries and things like that, but it can be really inaccessible, right? There can be times when you can feel really ostracized in those communities if you don't know the proper terminology or the proper way to like engage with it. And I found that with yours, like, even if it's public or if you're doing a workshop at a school, like even students can like access art, right, and create art in a way that like maybe folks hadn't originally thought about. Like a lot of times people are just like, oh, I'm not an artist. And it's like, you're helping create this mural on the side of a school. Like that counts, right? And so I really do love the accessibility aspect of your art. And then I just love seeing it around the city all the time. I see it like on all the schools and on the buildings and things like that. I'm sure folks have seen the big one that I know a lot of folks have seen is over at Roosevelt Collection by the movie theater there. But if you see it, definitely shout it out. I'm really bummed about the tile one that was over in West
it's in the
Loop.
process of being destroyed now. So for those
Yeah.
who don't know about that, it's
I'll put an
almost
image
50
of it.
feet tall and wide because
Yeah.
it's planet Earth, and that was one of the first things we did. It was done in response to some racist graffiti that was sprayed in the neighborhood. We were invited to come and help make that. And the idea of that mural entirely was to invite people to come and put a tile on the wall and remind people from the finished product of what we can achieve when we work together as opposed to being divided. And so, yeah, so that they told us that would last 3 to 5 years. It lasted 6. So I can't complain too much about the fact that that's.
I mean, let's just find another wall and do it again.
Yeah, I mean,
just keep doing it.
I think that's the thing, right? Like that at that moment in time, I'm not sure people really understood what I was saying when I would say, come make this with me, right? And so I think people have to see something to necessarily want to be able to participate. And so now there's enough examples of things that people can participate. And to your earlier point, you know, people are kind of coached to not think they're creative or not think they're artistic, whether that's through their job or through something someone said to them at school once upon a time. But I don't believe that. I think that everybody's creative. I think it's an inherent human superpower, actually. And I think that people need to realize that they can participate in this. Sorry about that.
I'll cut it out.
People can participate in these acts of creativity, and while they're doing that, it takes the lens off of the dialogue of maybe what the message is meaning, and it's just getting you to come out and create. And when you come out and create, whoever you're creating next to, because it's a giant mural usually, you're going to have to start to chat with whoever's next to you, and hopefully through that act you're going to start to realize that, like you said before, we do have a lot more in common than we have different. And so we should be trying to find that common ground that can lead us to understand the commonalities as opposed to the differences. And I think creativity is just an excellent way of doing that, because you have this result that you're proud of at the end, and you will return to, and you'll show it off to other people. And for the kids at the schools, that becomes the opportunity for them to be the ambassadors of the message. And I think that's what's really effective about it, is that instead of a child being, you know, told not to talk back and feeling bad if they hear something hateful and not being able to say anything because they're not supposed to talk back, instead we teach those same kids, you know, if you hear something hateful, don't argue, don't fight, don't, you know, get yourself into a dangerous position, but remind the hateful person that we all live here, and then just walk away. because you planting that thought in their head and them not being able to respond means they have to sit with that thought. And then hopefully that's the reason for hopefully all the murals being so visible, is that hopefully that person then who got schooled by the 6-year-old will then be driving later on that day and see it somewhere else, and then see it on someone's hat or someone's shirt or someone's something else. And all of a sudden it keeps chipping away and reminding them, and hopefully that will eventually change the way they're thinking. So
I think you bring up a really good point, right? It gives you pause when you see it at first, right? Because it's not that it's that long that you have to read it, but you're reading it and you're seeing it and you're like, oh, that's true. And that's really simple. And like, oh, wait, I hadn't thought about it that way, right? Like, that's what I love. And that's why, I mentioned in the beginning that you're sort of a disruptor. And I don't mean in like a negative way, but I mean in like you're challenging people's beliefs and disrupting their thoughts about how we engage with this earth and things like that. And so I actually want to dig into a little bit about what you did back in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, when you helped with the mural that was outside of the Chicago police station there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and how that came to be. And
well, yes, so it didn't actually happen. We tried everything we could under the sun to do a Black Lives Matter mural on the street outside of the police academy, because in my mind, there sort of became a trend of these Black Lives Matter street murals going up. First I think with the mayor in DC doing it, and then I think my friend did one in Atlanta, and then he also did one somewhere else in South Carolina. And rather than that being a trend, I think it's something that if you're going to do that, it needs to be put somewhere where it matters. And if the idea is to change the mentality of the police, rather than coming up with I think defund the police is a very dysfunctional slogan. It like the wrong idea to so many people. But if you could put the Black Lives Matter message outside of the police academy, then everybody going into the police academy to learn how to be a police officer is going to have that thought in their head, and it can't help but do more good, right? No, we did do a Black Lives Matter up in Uptown, closer to where you live, and that kind of scratched the itch, I guess. But again, it wasn't placed in a place where I felt like it would make the maximum impact. And I guess I'm biased towards putting these messages in places where they can have the best impact. And unfortunately, we just couldn't get the approval. I was really surprised with a Black so-called progressive mayor in Chicago that we wouldn't be able to break through and get that done. But I guess things are the way they are.
No, I remember seeing about it, of course, on Instagram. And then if you Google, a lot of times you'll see that article that ABC7 did about it and things like that. So I just really appreciated, again, that disruption of our spaces, of our thoughts, in a way that challenges people to really think deeper about the aspects of something and I keep saying this, right? It's so simple. And yet I think so many people struggle to even realize that, we've seen memes, going around like you have more in common with someone who's houseless than rich billionaires and things like that. And it's like we all do, right? Like, so it's something.
There's a reason why it's the 1% or the top 10%, 10th of a 1%, that by its very name means that hardly anybody has anything in commom with that part of the population. So but even within that framework, we do have commonalities with like we live here on the same planet, even though it seems like billionaires live on a totally different planet and they're maybe trying to leave this planet.
I keep telling everybody, they're not going to they can't survive. It takes thousands of people to keep 6 people alive on the space station. it's not going to happen. But okay, it's cute. It's cute. And I love space. Like, I'm super.
I think it's like a really exciting ability that we have that we've used human ingenuity to leave the planet. Like, that's bonkers to me. But the idea of Mars somehow being colonized, that's just not it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. Elon Musk can try as hard as he wants, and so can Jeff Bezos, but I just don't see it.
We all live here on a rocket, on a dragon Falcon going up there.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was
Yeah.
you're talking about, being privileged enough to have visited a number of countries and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
I think that that's part of maybe the reason why I thought of this too is, Americans are stuck with the history because it's their history, and whether they have direct ancestry is not the point. It's the country, and being a citizen of the country, you have that history. And so when you're attached to the history,
Mhm.
it can be very difficult to see a different thing besides the history. And I think being from Canada,
Yes.
I am an American citizen, but I grew up in Canada. So I think I was able to see it more from a third party perspective,
Mhm.
like outside and looking in.
Yeah.
And then when you look at things like that, maybe you can identify a solution rather than get hung up on the problem.
Right.
And that's something that I think is really important to think about,
Mm.
how our past is maybe holding us down like an anchor
Mm.
rather than giving us the ability to break free.
Mm. Mm. I that's a really
I
great
don't think it should be ignored. Like obviously history, we're told all the time, right? History, we learn about history so that history doesn't repeat itself. Well,
And it
it's almost
literally
laughable these days, right? When we're watching history repeat itself,
Yeah.
no matter what. That's the basic history that everybody gets. That's not even
Right.
debatable for anything. It's in all the textbooks, right? The
Yeah.
World War II stuff. But I don't know.
Yeah. I think we could have like a whole other discourse about that, because I also think, we are literally saying like history shouldn't repeat itself. And it literally is, because we aren't breaking the patterns, right? We aren't breaking the behaviors that cause these things. And so of course it's continuing to happen. And we're like, all right, why is that happening? I can't believe it. And it's like, really? You can't believe it? You're not
Right. Well, and that's why I wanted to work with kids, because
Right.
like we can plant the seed with the kids.
Yeah.
And the kids can bring this message forward, and the kids can, the reason I'm hopeful at all is because of those kids, right? And they will grow up with a different mentality no matter what, whether I've been to their school or not, than their grandparents, their great grandparents, or even their parents.
Yeah.
So
that segues really nicely actually into I was hoping you can tell me the story again of when you were out in the plaza by NBC Tower, and the young boy that came up to you, and I just wondered if you could tell us that story again.
So that was a second project that we did with Apple on Pioneer Court outside the Apple store right on the river. And this little boy came up, and we're in the middle of drawing. I think we did 24 12 by 12 emojis, so 12 feet by 12 feet emojis. And the reason for that was it was still big, but it was more approachable for all the people that would walk past and didn't necessarily know what was going on and wanted to join in. They could say, oh, I want to draw the rainbow, or I want to draw the whatever, the hot dog. But this little boy came up, and the first thing out of his mouth was, is it free? And how unwelcoming is downtown that's the first thing out of a little boy's mouth, because he's probably been to a bunch of places all day long that he couldn't play because it cost too much. And so even if it hadn't been free, which it was, it would have been free for that little guy, because he came up and asked, right? He wanted to play. But the delight on his face when he realized that he could participate and he could actually draw and he could create something was really amazing. And then we do have a photo of him, covered head to toe in chalk. It's like the perfect ad for Tide.
Right.
Getting in there and getting completely messy and helping to create that message. But that's just a wonderful day. I mean, I was really thankful that Apple, I had tried to do large scale things downtown before, and permitting and things like that are always a challenge. And Apple kind of had the attitude like, well, we don't really care. We'll get permission, whatever is necessary. Like our lawyers can probably handle that. So they were a great partner in many ways, but that was especially great.
I'll definitely put an image of that because that was really great. I remember seeing that. I wonder if you have any other, I know you go to a lot of schools, any other stories about like big wins or like moments where you're just like, oh yeah, okay, I'm on the right path, I'm in alignment with this project.
Yeah, I mean, right right before, well, I guess in the middle of the pandemic,
Yeah.
at the beginning of the early part of the pandemic, we were doing a school facade. You know, things have evolved from, you know, simple signs on a fence to murals to now schools saying, hey, we want to change the whole look of our school.
Yes.
And so this particular project is in the old Caprini Green neighborhood, which is also very symbolic. And so when I was making this mural, basically we made it so that we counted all the bricks on the facade, and then we recreated those with magnets, and we sprayed the whole facade with magnetic paint so that these magnets would stick and just look like bricks. Then we created a color palette of 16 different colors. And the way the math worked out with the number of bricks necessary and the number of kids, each kid had to do 7 bricks. And then we invited them to also write something positive or inclusive on the backside of one of their bricks, because the idea was to start a new tradition for the school. So 8th graders would remix the front facade of their building.
Yeah.
And but while they would be moving those bricks around, they would have to take them off and potentially see maybe their message from years before, or maybe a message from a friend who no longer goes to the school or moved to Colorado or whatever.
Right.
And so I thought that was really cool. But on top of that, while I was doing all of the painting, people from that neighborhood who had grown up in Caprini Green and been around in that community for 30, 40, 50, 60 years would drive by and yell out the window how supportive they were over this project, because they were seeing a school that they went to, which had kind of been at least outwardly neglected, aesthetically at least. And they were really happy to see it being reinvigorated. And so many other things in their community had been torn down and replaced, and in a lot of ways not even replaced, because there's still a lot of vacant land over there. But it was really, it felt good to me to know that people who were there and who were really concerned about that neighborhood, because that was their neighborhood, were giving it the approval. I thought that was really cool. And that was before they ever even saw the finished product, which was really kind of an explosion of color, because we didn't tell the kids how to paint their bricks. They had the autonomy to, you know, if they wanted to make all 7 yellow, there was 2 shades of yellow that they could choose from, but you know, that was up to them. But if they wanted to make all 7 different colors, then they could do that too. So it was almost like generative art with humans rather than computers, right? Because you carve out the little sandbox for people to create within. And then you still don't really know what the end result's going to be, because that variable of them getting to choose certain things is so important to the process. So like even the mock-ups, I would mock it up for people so they could see it, so they could approve it. But I would always caution them, like, this is just a mock-up. I have no idea. Maybe the kids will pick all blue. Like, we don't know. And so, but it was really fun to make that one happen and see that one come to life.
I always get so many ideas when I'm talking to you, and I'm like listening to you say this now, and it's just reminding me of like, it's like meta that you are creating ownership. You're creating ownership on multiple levels, right? The people that live in that community are feeling ownership for their space that you're helping them recreate, that they are getting to make their own pieces with, right? You don't know what they're going to do, right? Like, that's also a disruption of like what we think about when we think about public art, right? Because a lot of times people just want to go put their art in some other place to like make it look a certain way, but you're like, no, I want people to feel like this is their neighborhood, or this is their school, or this is their space. And I think that's another aspect that I really appreciate about We All Live Here, because the ownership component, especially in a city like Chicago that's had so many of those situations, like in Cabrini Green, like with the redlining, with, you know, all the different neighborhoods that we have, is just so important to like give back that ownership in that way to folks that live in those areas. So,
well, I mean, even the Planet mural to a certain degree accomplished that goal, because that whole West Loop Fulton Market area is changing so quickly and pushing out so many things that were there for so long, and residents are marginalized like crazy. It's about real estate developers and revenue for the city, and so residents are just getting dwarfed by skyscrapers all of a sudden. but that project gave them a chance to actually physically build something within their neighborhood. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
And then I think the lesson where I really learned to just like trust the process the most was from the first Apple project, where we just originally I wanted to create the Apple logo, the rainbow vintage Apple logo, with the "We All Live Here" and some font. When I started doing research for that, it turns out the very first font ever on a Macintosh computer was called Chicago. So when the universe gives you gold, you go with the gold, right? And so we used that font and we just wrote "We All Live Here" with the Apple colors as the backdrop. And that project was just about coloring in the letters in the color it was supposed to be colored, the background being the rainbow color background, but those lines had to be colored in whatever color. If I had planned that out without Apple's help, I would have bought the sidewalk chalk that we make as like a street artist toolkit, because it lasts longer and it's a totally different thing than for this big, huge project. But Apple went and bought a bunch of Crayola chalk, which I think is actually engineered to be used up quicker. So I wouldn't sell that because I would want my people that buy it to be able to use it as much as possible. But when Apple did that, it created like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shades of blue, purple, green, orange. And so overall, someone sorted that out, which sounds like my idea of hell, but that it turned out that person came up to me and they told me, like,
they love
we
that
love
stuff.
organizing things. And so, like, this is the best day of work ever because I got to take all these colors and make them into these bins.
Yeah.
And so, but the finished product, when you could see that from above, because everybody had to wait till we had the drone footage and the time lapse from the offices above.
Yeah.
And when you saw the finished product, it was more beautiful because it had all these different shades in the right colors, in the right spots, but the different shades, not only is that metaphorical, but those different shades made it look better. And that is where I kind of really learned, like, see, if I would have hyper controlled that, I wouldn't have got this result. My result would have been more bland and more generic. So this result is much better. And so from now on, from this moment forward, I am going to trust that the contributors are going to contribute just as much.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, which I think is probably, as an artist, right? You think like, I'm putting my art out there, but you're giving ownership to these people to do what they want. And it naturally is working out really well because that's just sort of how it works, right? It's just really going well. And so I do wonder if you could tell us, like, where is We All Live Here going? I know where I want it to go. We've talked about this. Like, I want it in every city, in every corner, like everywhere around the world. But I wonder if you have any.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, actually, is the answer at this point in time, because with the pandemic, if you would have told me, first of all, I have to back up a minute.
Yeah.
It's almost my fault that the pandemic happened, because I was on a different podcast being interviewed by someone just a couple of weeks before the pandemic happened.
Before the lockdown,
Yeah, and so they were asked, one of their questions was, what is life like 5 years into this, compared to year one or whatever. And I was like, well, this is amazing for the first time. And this was like January, February, right? I can see all the way to November and where I'm going to be booked and all these things. And then a week later, the world totally changed. And if you would have told me that, getting people together to make art would somehow suddenly be life threatening and would not be possible, I would have laughed at you. And this whole organization was built upon the model of going in and doing these projects at schools. And that's how we generate the lion's share of the funds that the organization has. And so, that has basically stopped for the last couple of years because you can't just go into schools anymore. And so we did a number of stuff when the pandemic first happened. I reached out to a bunch of different Chicago artists. We created a coloring book because my focus at the very first moment of the pandemic hitting was, man, parents are going to need some distraction for their kids that will give them some time to work from home where the kids are distracted and busy. And a coloring book's one of those things that, takes some time to work your way through. So that coloring book was like 50 pages long or something like that. So there was a lot of material for people to do. And And then what else we do? We worked with Frontline Foods to donate a bunch of different meals, to partner up with schools that we already worked with and some new schools that we were going to work with whenever that would be possible again, so that those could be meal sites for people to get free meals. We did a mural thanking essential workers on the outside of the studio building, and Jones Soda picked that up and put it on their bottles, both in Canada and the US. So that was really cool. But I think the most cool thing that came out of it was we started to make virtual school software called Schooltopia.
Yep.
And Schooltopia, to me, like, and education, unfortunately, is not necessarily inherently the most innovative place, right?
Yeah.
There might be innovative teachers within the ecosystem, but for the most part, it's really a bureaucracy. And so I started to think, because people don't realize that principals never left their buildings. So I would be doing these big front of the school mural facade projects, thankfully, keeping me fed.
Yeah.
And they might have been designed to work with 400, 500, 600 kids, but I was now doing it all by myself so that they could be there when the kids came back. But the principals would come out and talk to me about some of their challenges with remote learning, hybrid learning, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the principals told me about their math teacher, and how he wanted to teach their kids how to play guitar because he was having such a hard time relating math through this like Zoom environment.
Yeah. And
so his solution was, I'm going to teach them how to play guitar. It's still math, but he didn't have a place to put it. So if you and I wanted to give a guitar lesson, right, it would be a really bad lesson if I gave it, but I would put it on YouTube and then it would, I would send people a link. Yeah. But in a school where YouTube's banned and blocked, then that doesn't work. Right. So I got really excited because Schooltopia became, I in the back of my mind, I knew in 2020 that my jobs were gonna keep going down and I wasn't gonna be able to fill up the pipeline again. And so I was kind of thinking like, how am I going to get through 2021? And then started working on Schooltopia and started realizing, this is going to be maybe a way that the organization can get even further. And so I, as an entrepreneur, got even more excited because it was almost like starting a new business, even though it's, it's still the same kind of, in my mind, it's the same kind of thing that we could easily do under the We All Live Here umbrella. But then I ran into the wall of trying to get that approved. Being an art vendor is different than being a tech vendor, and getting through the bureaucracy to be a tech vendor when I don't have, a $29 million insurance policy and all kinds of other things, has been really a challenge. And that then also turned into something that I guess had to work through emotionally, because I went from being kind of like getting a little bit worried to being super excited to then like being stymied almost, right? Not able to worry about it. Right. Hang on.
No worries.
All right. So where we go, I know we'll be making art. I know working with more companies to help bring those opportunities to schools as soon as we can. I've had conversation. I got to go to a school yesterday for the first time in a really long time to meet about a project, and just like being able to be within the four walls of a school and meet with principals and talk to them about what they want to do at their school and see people in a school. And actually, ironically, the mask optional option just became an option. So like I showed up at the school, I obviously have a mask, I'm all vaxxed and I'm all, boosted and all the things. But I was ready in case, maybe there's a rapid test you take to be able to get into the school. But that was the first week of their mask optional policy. So of course, outsiders from the school are supposed to keep their masks on, but they said, they're like, now that we sort of have this guidance, we're going to be allowed to let folks like yourself into our school. Because the assembly is such an important part of what our program's all about, that I was really, I just wasn't even entertaining the idea of doing it through this kind of environment, because it just doesn't have that effect. So
Yeah. We'll get back there. We'll get back there. And I just, yeah, like I said, I can't wait to see it everywhere, all around the world, because it definitely needs to be in every corner, in every city, in every school, so that more folks can continue to spread that message. So I have my final question that I usually do, that's like a this or that thing, and it's not related at all to what we talked about, but I wonder if you prefer the mountain or the ocean.
Oh, wow. That's something to think about all the time. I think in Chicago in the winter, I want to go somewhere warm, which usually involves the ocean, right? But naturally, I think I'm inclined to the beauty of the mountains. If I had to choose between the two, I think that mountains are just like,
I went out.
They have a presence in a different sense than the ocean does, that feels almost mystical. Whether that's Palm Springs or the Rockies or the Alps, it's just like a totally different aura that you feel when you're in a mountainous area.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Rich, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. I'm sure talk to you soon.
Definitely. Thanks, Ella.